Hello and welcome to the Indy Author Podcast. Today, my guest is MK Williams. Hey, MK, how are you doing?
Hi, Maddie. Thank you so much for having me back on the show. I'm excited to be here.
I am excited to have you here. And just to give our listeners and viewers a little reminder of your many accomplishments, since you are a returning guest, MK Williams had one simple goal. She needed more time to write her own books. After self-publishing 2 novels, she found herself spending more time answering questions from aspiring authors than working on her next manuscript. Out of necessity, Author Your Ambition was born. Since 2015, she has written and self-published her own collection of books and helped dozens of authors on their independent publishing journey through a series of videos, books, and courses. And MK has been a previous guest several times. She was in episode 109, Why Retailers and Aggregators Not the Usual Suspects. In episode 71, we talked about the provider side of author services, and she also contributed to episode 82, which was Perspectives on Writer's Block. And so I invited MK back to talk about one of those resources for authors that we mentioned in the bio, and that is workbooks. And this seems to be really a growing trend. So, MK, I just wanted to start out saying, what did you see either in your own work or your work with your clients, work with fellow authors that made you feel like a workbook was something you wanted to pursue?
So, workbooks are such an interesting element. And I've worked with several authors who've created workbooks. The first workbook I worked on was an author who was a school teacher and saw a need for a planned curriculum around entrepreneurship for high school students. And so he built out what would be the student workbook and then what would be the instructor edition with answers and prompts and questions. And we built that out. And then my client right after that had a course. It was successful. And she had people in the course say, I would like a workbook to work through because some people learn best by listening. Some people learn best through video courses where they're writing it down themselves. And some people want the whole package. I need a course and a workbook to go along with it that tells me what to do and fill it out. And that's how some people learn best. And so having worked with several people on workbooks, I knew they had potential to help people learn. So I knew the benefits of it, but I also knew they're very visual. They do best when it's a printed out version. People using an EPUB version of a workbook, they're not getting the full advantage. Now there's certain devices such as the Kindle Scribe where somebody can write and get some of that benefit. But I knew that there were challenges to workbooks as well as benefits. But I started to see a need for that with the clients I was working for to have them work through some of the exercises that we would talk about getting them on their independent publishing journey. And I thought, I think it's time. I think it's time for me to put this all together into one item that somebody can purchase and work through. If my videos aren't enough, if hiring me as a coach isn't in their budget, then this is a nice middle ground. So I had gotten comfortable enough doing several workbooks with clients that I thought, okay, I can give this a try.
So I wanted to talk about your specific workbook, and later on, I want to talk a little bit more generally about workbooks, other types of workbooks, because I
Mhm.
realize that when I think of workbook, I think of an auxiliary document to a book, like the companion piece, like if you've read chapter 3, answer the 4 questions at the end of the chapter in this section of the workbook. And
Mhm.
yours is not really like that. And I guess the other way it's not really like that is I think it's a standalone book unto itself. Like it's kind of a compilation of all your other Author Your Ambition books, if I understand correctly. So can you just talk about those aspects, like describe your workbook a little bit?
Yes. Yeah. And what you said about workbooks, that's also very valid, where it could be a companion piece. So you have a book and then you have the companion workbook. I've also seen people just do companion sheets, like one off at the end of the chapter. Go to mywebsite.com/worksheet and claim your worksheets, which I've done in my other books. But this workbook, I wanted somebody to go through all the decision points. So when I started self publishing, I didn't know what I was doing. And so I kind of made my checklist as I figured it out. And the second book came along and I was able to revise the checklist. And over time, I added the checklist to Asana, which is a task management process that I use. And it got bigger and it got more detailed and branching. And I would use that checklist when I was working with clients. And it would tell me this date, remind so and so to do this. This date, tell so and so, remind them to do this. And so I realized over time my clients wanted access to that checklist where they said, well, I did the first book. I loved working with you. I'm ready to do the second book. What was that checklist you had me going through again? And so I wanted to make sure somebody could pick up this massive hunker of a workbook And all of the decision points would be in here. I didn't want it to be that somebody would purchase this and be like, I don't understand half the things I have to do. Because I've seen that happen where people sell workbooks and it really, they just find it on Amazon. It was recommended to them. They don't realize there's a companion book to it. They don't realize there's a companion course to it. And they buy it and they leave it 1-star reviews. They're like, this was so hard to get through. I had no clue what this was talking about. And so I wanted this to be able to act as a standalone so that if I'm not on the phone with someone guiding them through it, that they could work through it in whatever way they learn best. And in some ways, it is still a companion to the other Author Your Ambition books. In self-publishing for the first-time author, I'm talking about the decisions that need to be made, but I'm not saying, okay, and here's where you're going to write down the strategy. So this is, it can stand alone. It can be a companion. And again, I wanted it however somebody best learns. Some people learn best by, I need to read it multiple times. I need to go through it multiple times. Some people just say, I need to get my hands dirty and figure it out. So I did want to have that there for them. And so part of the methodology was, yes, I'm going to walk you through all the decisions, but at the same time, some of the decisions you have to make concurrently. And this isn't a magical book where the pages move for you. So telling people, read it through because marketing's in the back section, but you have to make some marketing decisions early on. And I have little stop signs of like, stop here. This is a big decision point. Don't rush past this. Or stop here. Make sure it's all one manuscript before you send it out to your editor. Don't send them 15 different files for each chapter. So kind of pointing out the big issues that I was seeing that authors were having, or just the little things that they didn't think to think of, and kind of putting that all together. So it took me a long time to make it perfect. And I was very grateful to my beta readers who were newer to self-publishing to say, oh, what about this? What about this? Because I don't remember what it was like the first time anymore. That was back in 2015. So very grateful to have the feedback to be able to think of it as an instructor and an educator of how will people learn best through the process versus just, well, here's what I do, and really try to bring it all together. It was a big challenge, but it was fun.
At what point did you decide it was enough? You didn't have to keep adding in to make it bigger and bigger and more comprehensive.
Yeah, so that's where I decided the scope was launching the first book. So writing, editing, launching the first book. So I kind of decided at that point it's done. There's obviously more I talk about on my YouTube channel about continued marketing, backlist marketing, what happens when you have to do a second edition, all of those items. But I thought that this will just go on for thousands of pages if I try to do every single thing. So I really wanted to keep the scope to that first book process. Now, obviously, if somebody purchases the PDF version of this, they can print it out again for book 2 and book 3. And some of it they'll say, okay, I've already made those decisions. I don't need this page, but really trying to keep the scope within writing and getting through that launch phase. And then you're on your own. Enjoy the book sales. So that was an easy way for me to keep the scope in mind, but also to keep that ideal reader in mind and make sure I'm answering their questions.
Yeah, I think another way I've seen workbooks used, just to mention various flavors of workbooks, is I think that Jay Thorne and Zach Bohannon did this with their 3-story method book. And then they were using it to teach classes, and they found that people wanted to be able to capture notes about it, and they wanted a new one for each book. So they wanted a physical thing because, many people like that. They want to have something to write in, but they wanted, each time they were starting a new book and applying the 3-story method, they wanted to be able to make notes about it. And so if I remember correctly, Jay and Zach's approach was to create a workbook that really was kind of just fill in the answers to the questions and price it just a little bit above their cost. So they were doing it less as a money-making thing unto itself, as a service to their clients and a nice companion piece to their book, which I'm imagining was more of the moneymaker. So I'm just throwing that out because,
yes,
there are many ways people can use books. And I'm assuming
absolutely.
that you're looking to the workbook to be a moneymaker, not unreasonably.
Well, hopefully at least earning back what I invested in it. My goal every time I write a book in the Author Your Ambition series, now this workbook is titled Author Your Ambition, but the other books in the series, self-publishing for the first-time author, book marketing for the first-time author, going wide, all of that is really about how can I answer the question so I can get back to writing my book. And so that's always my first goal is, have I answered the questions completely enough that somebody can use this? And I think anybody who's looking to make a workbook, that should be your primary goal is what is the person going to get out of this? What benefit will it give the reader and the user of the workbook? So that way it's complete. Now, I know some people will use it for, okay, you went through my workbook, now sign up for my course, or vice versa. You sign up for the course, now get the workbook. But I think making sure the person going through it feels that they're getting the value and learning the thing you're trying to teach them. That always has to be the number one goal. And then if there's more they want to go into with your platform, that's awesome. That's great. I would love it if people complete this book and then they want to check out the YouTube channel or they want to check out the other Author Your Ambition books. But hopefully they feel like I've got it, I'm solid, and I'll just say, sweet, I'm going to go work on my book.
Yeah, many valid goals, many legitimate goals, just being sure you understand ahead of time what yours is and then making it clear to the reader what they're going to get. Are they going to get something that is standalone, or are they going to get something that's intended as a companion piece to something else?
Exactly. And I think the subtitles help with that, right? So if this is a companion workbook, it should say a companion workbook to in the subtitle, and really just making it crystal clear. I will say one thing with having workbook in your title or subtitle, you may get flagged as being low content on your book, which maybe it is low content. Maybe it really is just a lot of journaling prompts and lines for people to fill out. But I know with Ingram Spark, I got flagged as being low content and, not suitable for distribution. And I wrote, and I was like, this book has over 50,000 words. It is definitely not low content.
Yeah,
please distribute it. And then within like 24 hours, they said, yeah, you're fine. So I just had to do the manual review. But for the first 24 hours, I was waiting for that response. I was like, oh no. But yeah, it all worked out. But that was just a new thing that a couple of years ago when I was helping authors with their workbooks, that wasn't part of Ingram's requirements. And so this was a new challenge I had to face. But never a dull moment in self-publishing. Never.
Yeah. So I wanted to start out with editing, and you had mentioned one tip about make sure you give your editor one big file, not a whole bunch of little files. Can you describe how you found your editor for this particular type of book and how that process was similar to or different from work you've done on other books with your editors?
So this book, I actually took a different approach. Usually my husband's my very first reader for every book I write. And so he sees the worst of it. And then after that, it goes to my editors for my fiction book. But for this one, I thought, I told my husband, I was like, honey, I think this actually needs to go to some beta readers who are self-publishing authors first before he sees it, because, he'll say, okay, this kind of makes sense to me, but he doesn't have any interest in self-publishing. And so I switched up my process where I actually had some beta readers go through who were self-published authors looking to self-publish and ask them the questions first before it even went to him, who's usually my first reader, and then to editors for proofing, because I wanted to know from that first timer's perspective, does this make sense? Can you follow this? Or what question did I not answer? What's the big alarm going off in your head that I haven't solved for? So it was very different, especially for my fiction, very different from the fiction process, because it would be active and asking the beta readers, okay, did you print this out? And to go through it, did you work through it this way? What's the best way I can then direct you to this page? So it was a much more involved process than I've had before. And in my mind, I treated it as if I was making a course, a video course, and I wanted people to go through it and beta it. What would the questions be that I would ask them? So I treated it almost having beta readers for a course, even though it was beta readers for a workbook. So it was an added challenge. Again, you always have to herd cats when you have multiple beta readers come in, but they all did a wonderful job and gave me great suggestions, so that it added to the length of the editing process, but I think it made it so much better.
And did you pull those beta readers from a community that you already had created?
Yeah, so I have a channel membership on my YouTube channel. I asked those members if they would like to beta read, and several of them volunteered. And also from my newsletter, I had several people volunteer right away. I just put out a call for, hey, if you can commit to reading this by this date and getting me feedback, please send me an email. And then I just confirmed with them again, like, okay, so you're good with doing all of these things. And then I was able to send that to them. So I had a really solid group get back to me with that feedback, and always so grateful that they were willing to give their time, because I know as authors, we don't have much free time. So really grateful for those who went through it and gave it this little polish and shine.
Yeah. And then there was the design aspect, which would have been quite different, I imagine, than any book you had done before. Certainly would have been different than any book I've done before. Can you describe a little bit about the design and then how you came to that?
Yeah, so design, I always tell people I'm a words creative. I'm not a visual creative. And so it's one of those things where I kind of had an idea. I know how I want this to flow. I know how I want this to look. And I found this really great team back in 2021 called Formatted Books. They format books. They do so at what I would say is self-publishing prices for print and ebook, and they added on a cover design service last year. And so I've worked with them before, and in some of our conversations, mentioning I had clients who did workbooks, they said we would love to do more workbooks. We have really great designers who could do that. And so when this is coming up, I said, hey, would you guys be willing to do this? Here's the page length. Here's how many images are going to be in the book, because I have calendars in there. I have little permission slip certificates people can use. I have diagrams of how should I buy my own ISBNs, a little flow chart, the kind of diagrams of what you need for each book, and sent that all over. And they said they could absolutely do it. And they did a wonderful job and got the cover done first try. I mean, I loved this cover when it came up. It's blue and beautiful and aspirational. And it's one of those things where I was like, I had no idea what I wanted the cover to look like, but when I saw it, it looked amazing. And they did a great job with the interior as well. For those who are seeing video, you can see it, but if not, I'll describe it for the audio listeners. They added like a full bleed of color to the edge of the page. So you can easily see like, oh, this is the section I'm in. I'm in the blue section. I'm in the green section. I'm in the purple section. So really making it easy for an author to find where they are, to remember where they are. And that was something I had seen in previous workbooks I had worked on. So thankfully, I had this experience helping others with their workbooks to kind of pick and pull the best of it, and looking at other workbooks in general, just like what's a workbook for this? What's a workbook for this topic? And pulling and grabbing some ideas, and working with a great designer helped. I think if I had just formatted it by myself, it would have taken away from the content. And that's what good design is supposed to be. It's supposed to enhance the content and make it easier to the point you don't even notice the design. You just know, oh, I'm understanding things clearly. So very, very grateful for the team at Formatted Books for that. And I'd say for anybody thinking of doing a workbook, definitely work with a designer who's worked on workbooks before, who understands more of that, because the person who can do an amazing formatting for your interior, say your fantasy, high fantasy series, they may not have worked on workbooks before. So Formatted Books thankfully has a whole team of designers, so they are able to do multiple things. I was really grateful for that, and it was worth what it looks like now to make it look great.
And that was I'm not going to ask you to name numbers, but I'm assuming that you paid them for that service as opposed to, for example, splitting royalties with them.
Correct.
Yeah.
So they're a service where you just pay up front for the design, and then that's returned. I actually talk about that in the workbook when somebody's vetting a designer. Well, some will be, okay, well, I need a down payment and a final payment. Some services just say, enter your credit card here. Some services say, okay, like doing royalty splits, but Formatted Books is just pay here, and then you get the final product. So I was grateful for that. It was one less thing to have to worry about when it was done.
And I'm assuming that they quoted the price based on the information you gave them about number of words and number of images, and that you wanted the cover design and all those things.
Correct. So anybody who's going to do a workbook, go through, know your total number of images. That can be a big factor. The total page count as well as the word count, because page count in a workbook isn't always indicative of word count and vice versa, right? Because of usually a 50,000 word book would not be this thick and massive, but because there is space to fill things in and diagrams and charts, that's why it takes up so many pages. My mini phone book.
So if you had a change you wanted to make, would you need to go back to that provider in order to make that change?
Yeah. So that I would say is the one con of working with a design service is, yes, when I have an edit to make, I need to go back to them. And maybe that week the designer who did it is sick and they say, well, we can get it back to you next week, and delays like that. But for the value of me not having to design it and throw my computer out the window and buy a new computer and get the software again and throw the new computer out the window, all of those things, it was much more worth it for the convenience of them doing that and then having to go back and ask for a few edits later, it works for me.
Do you have any idea if they used a program for the formatting that if somebody wanted to take that on, they would be able to? Like if somebody was getting I don't know, Adobe Illustrator or something, I don't even know, but some program where they would be able to make textual changes. Did you ever discuss that as an option with the designer or hear about that as an option?
I haven't discussed it, but I would assume if I went to them and said, hey, I have a few edits I need to make, things are busy, can you give me the working files? I don't see why they wouldn't make that, but I haven't had that conversation. And if that is something as an author that you want to have the control over, then that's certainly something to ask at the outset, to have those conversations. And I even have a checklist in here for that, to ask, like things to ask your designers. before you work with them, and understanding how they communicate. What are the deliverables? Are you getting the working files? Are you not getting the working files? How are edits going to work? That's all in here to make sure you're asking those questions, whether it's your cover designer, your interior formatter. I don't think I will, again, I'm not a visual designer. I'm a words creative. So I think even if I downloaded whatever program and had the working files, it would be bad. I'm happy to let somebody else do that for me.
I wanted to talk then about the distribution aspects. And the fact that it is such a big book, it brought about some considerations for distributions. I'm assuming, based on what you said, that Ingram Spark doesn't do any lower, no content books. Is that true?
Yes. So I believe that was something that came out a couple years ago, that they were not going to be distributing low content books. And I'm guessing it was just because of the surge of people who were starting to design that. So they have a list of things that they will and won't distribute on their catalog integrity list. So low content books are on there. And I believe if it's primarily just lined paper, that's not something they're going to be doing. But thankfully, through KDP and other services, people who do low content books can still do that. But you are able to petition and say, hey, you need to take a second look at my book because this should be considered. So that's something to keep in mind with distribution. For my case, and I think in some of the cases of authors that I've helped, where they also have a course that this is a companion to, or their primary goal is, I want somebody to print this out and write it down or buy the print copy. It's then saying, do I want to make an audio version available? No. Do I want to make a hardcover version available? Maybe yes, no. How is that going to work with how it opens and lays flat, potentially, to be able to write in it? And same thing with an EPUB version. I was originally very skeptical of having an EPUB version of the workbook, primarily because most e-readers you can't write on until the Kindle Scribe was released. And I did have several people in my membership say, give people the option. If they have a device where their EPUB files, they can write on it, they should have the option. And what I did is I included in the front of the EPUB file saying, if you bought this as an EPUB for your device and you cannot put stylus to screen, please email me here with your proof of purchase and I'm going to send you the PDF. So that way you can print it out and use it as intended, because that is always a challenge with workbooks, is that really they're meant to be written in and worked through, but we have so many options. And as indie authors, we often feel like, well, I have to have all the formats, but not every format makes sense. And so that was something I had to keep in mind with my distribution and how I was messaging the book. I couldn't use my standard messaging like available in all formats everywhere. I was like, well, get the PDF here direct from me and get the print book here. And if you really want the EPUB, you can get it here, but I don't recommend it. So I had to hem and haw a little bit with the marketing.
Did you ever consider doing like a spiral bound version?
Yes and no. So the downside with Ingram Spark is that you don't have the spiral bound option that is available to independent authors through a service called Lulu. You can do spiral bound, you can do other bindings, but I was already set up with Ingram Spark. And my thought was, I value convenience in my plan, and having, well, all my books are available here except for one book over here with Lulu, and having to do that was a layer of complication I did not want. But I've worked with other authors who do have workbooks, and part of the conversation is, how are people going to be accessing it? What kind of binding type do you want? And there's been several times I've recommended Lulu because of their additional options. Now, some of the options that a person may select may exclude them from wide distribution. So that is one thing to keep in mind with Lulu. You can always be available on their direct website and you can sell on your website, but some of the options you pick may exclude you from getting their global distribution. So that's really important to read that fine print on what they will and won't be able to distribute for you.
So Author Your Ambition is out via KDP Print and Ingram Spark. Any other forms you're going out through?
Yeah, so I always use Smashwords because I do have the EPUB file again for getting it out to Kobo, getting it out to all the other EPUB retailers. It's there, but it still has the same disclaimer. If you can't put stylus to screen, email me for the PDF. And then I have the PDF available for sale on my PayHip storefront, on Etsy, on my YouTube. I have a little bar below my videos where people can purchase. I have it there. So trying to make it easy for people when they're watching a video and they have questions, or where they know how to find me, that they can easily find it in a format that they could print out and use it there. So it's definitely the most unique distribution I have for all my books, because all the other ones, it's easy. It's like, oh, fiction book, upload, available everywhere, even libraries, go check it out. Whereas this one is definitely unique.
So that leads me to asking about pricing, because obviously the cost of producing a book like Author Your Ambition workbook is far greater, I'm imagining, the
Mhm.
production cost, for example, for a standard novel. So can you just talk through how you considered the costs of production and then factor that into the price you wanted to charge for it?
Yes. So the production cost heavily impacted the price that I felt comfortable with charging. I'm a very frugal person. And so in my mind, I always want to charge less. And I am very grateful to have my husband, who's very financially minded, to say, know your worth. Charge what it's worth. What are other people charging? And it's okay if people get that value. And unfortunately/fortunately, the print cost is high. It's a full color book. Usually I tell people, I'm like, if it can be in black and white, make it in black and white. Full color is more expensive. I was like, yeah, I have to do full color this time. It's an 8.5 by 11. So even just on KDP print, it's $25 just to produce the book. And that dictates the minimum that I can charge. But what I found is if I was going to purchase the PDF and print it out at home, well, I know my cost isn't just the PDF cost, it's some of the ink and toner and paper to print it out.
Yeah.
And so what I have marketed to people, I was like, you can buy the print book. It's already printed for you. You can start working on it right away. You can buy the PDF and print out the pages you need as you need them. Oh, and since you have the PDF, when the next book comes around, you can print it out again. I also know that there's a lot of value in here. And I think that gave me the confidence to say it's okay to charge more than what a standard book is, because this is more than a standard book. This is truly, an investment to say, I want to get my book done. I want to get it done right. I want to have somebody telling me, pull this lever here, push this button here. And that's what the workbook does. So it's still a challenge. I still feel so nervous every time I do, mention it. I'm like, yeah, like it's, getting close to $40 for the print version, but it's going to be something that's complete and it's still less expensive than hiring me as a coach. So I find that it's this nice middle ground that can help people. But then I always point people to the PDF, which I'm like, just check out the PDF instead. It's less expensive. And then you can decide what you need to print out. And that's a very valid pricing strategy for other authors who are thinking about that. Like, I really want people to just buy the ebook. I really just want to really boost my rankings there. And I'm not concerned with my print sales. Having another format where people can price compare might make the format you want to look more appealing. That's one reason why I have hardcovers now for 2 of my Author Your Ambition books, not because I thought I would sell hardcovers, but because I thought it would make the print or the paperback look more appealing. And that worked. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm looking at Author Your Ambition on Amazon now, and its listing now is $32.72, list price of $44.75.
Mm-hmm.
Did you provide the list price and mark it down yourself, or is Amazon doing that?
Amazon is pricing it down. So while it was on pre-order through Ingram Spark, I was able to charge $37.50 for the book, which was surprising because usually Ingram production costs are higher than the KDP print production costs. And so when I went to upload it to KDP, it said, no, the minimum you have to charge is like 40 something dollars. And I was like, oh, well, it's $37.50 everywhere else. So I just said, okay, I'm going to go with that. And knowing I'm pretty much making no royalty on Amazon when it's sold directly. And then they marketed it down to $37.50 now to the $32.75. So we'll see. We'll see.
And
how
when
that
they
keeps
mark it
going.
down, you still get royalties based on the list price. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. That's what I've seen.
Yeah. Well, the marketing aspect is interesting because you're right that along with all the other ways that this is different than the other books that you and I, most of our listeners and viewers probably are doing, it's almost like you want to compare it to a consult, not compare it to a book about self-publishing. It is interesting when are there certain tips that you've used in order to convey the interactive nature isn't quite the word I want, but it's not going to be them sitting down and paging through a book that they could get for $9.99 about self-publishing. How are you using the marketing to emphasize that message?
So what I'm really trying to show in marketing, and I've been experimenting with TikTok lately. So I was really trying to show there is like, these are the checklists. Like when you sit down for upload day, every author's like, this is it. Today's the day. I'm going to tell everybody my book's ready. And it's like, no. Follow the checklist. And at the end of the checklist, it clearly says, do not tell anybody that your book is ready until all the links are showing, all of them. And so telling people like, this is the value, is the day that you're so excited and you have this frantic, it's finally here energy. This book is going to help you calm down and make sure it's done right. And that you get the experience you want at the end. And trying to convey that to people and showing like, here's a messy checklist. Here's this nice checklist. Here's all the decisions to work through and the overwhelm you can feel. here's how this can, you feel calm when you're just going through this. And so that is one benefit to some of the new marketing avenues available is I can literally show frantic energy and then I can show calm energy. And that's a marketing tip I've seen from other authors on TikTok to use and other platforms is show that emotion that you can get from the book. And this is calm. This is calm and organized energy. I have a plan. I'm not going to panic energy versus that frantic, excited, nervous energy.
Yeah. Do you anticipate that you will need to be returning to it and doing regularly scheduled updates or second editions and things like that?
Unfortunately, yes. Fortunately, unfortunately, yes. That's one of the challenges I knew I was getting into by self-publishing books that were tactical and talking about this on this platform, you can't get this format. And on this platform, you can, is knowing that eventually that may change. So my hope is that hopefully I get 2.5 years before I have to do a second edition. Just because so much does change and I don't want to do a whole new edition if it's only one change, but we'll see what life gives us. I think one nice thing was that as I was working through this, the Drafted Digital Smashwords acquisition was finalized. I'm not mentioning that they were acquired. They're just together now.
Yeah.
It's just a thing.
Yeah.
So I was kind of able to future set that.
Yeah. It is interesting that the advantage of going through a platform like Ingram Spark or any drafted digital print, any POD, is that you don't have to purchase a big load of 350-page workbooks, which I think would make it probably not viable, or that would be a risk I would not want to take if I had that kind of resource available to me.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would have made it very difficult. I just don't have a lot of space to store them and then mail them. The shipping cost is higher. I think if that had been the case, if I truly did not have a print on demand option, well, where would my author career be without that? But I think I would have just launched with the print PDF first and just say, hey, here's a PDF you can print. And I may have said, hey, it's not beautiful, but give me your feedback, and maybe just given out free to more people to get feedback, and then designed it and just had the PDF available until enough people asked for the print version. But thankfully, we do have good print on demand resources, so I didn't have to do that.
Figuring the ROI on this would be very tricky because it's 50,000 words, it's 350 pages. And you were saying earlier that a lot of this content was content you were making for yourself anyway. So maybe you don't count that toward the cost of creating the book, but at some point you had to refine it further than you would if you were just using it yourself. And the money you spent on the formatter and the cover designer, and the fact that in some cases you're having to cut into what might be a more standard percentage over cost to make it affordable for the people who want to acquire it. And you had also said earlier that one of your primary drivers was to give the people who are following you on YouTube, consulting with you, this resource to use. So it hasn't been out there too long, but looking back from your position now, how are you assessing what you're getting and expect to get from it based on the ROI, based on the investment you made in it?
I think with each of my Author Your Ambition books, I haven't necessarily gone in with this book needs to earn me X dollars by X date, or else I don't consider it a success. Each of them was truly an attempt to say, okay, people keep asking these questions. What's the best way I can serve them? And for some people, I was like, okay, well, YouTube's working for some people. Oh, right. People read books. I write books. I can write a book. And so for me, I would say the best value, this is going to sound hokey, but it's like if I get a review from somebody that says this book is the reason why my book got published, this is the reason why I got things done, this helped me so much, thank you so much, like the gratitude and just knowing that people got through this process and they could enjoy it, they could enjoy this journey, that's truly the reward that I want from it. And I feel like maybe that sounds a little hokey and woo-woo, but I'm a little hokey and woo-woo, and that's truly what I want people to get from it. And I know some people say, oh, well, I have the book to sell more consults. I want the book to sell less consults. I would truly be so happy. Although, no, I would be sad. I know we talked about this a couple of weeks ago for my channel. It's like, I would be sad if I didn't have consults and I didn't have people to talk with, because I do get so much positive energy from helping people on their journey. But if it's a way where, as my daughter gets older and doesn't nap anymore, where I can still feel like I'm helping people, I'm helping them navigate without stepping on any landmines or falling into any traps or having any issues, I will just be so grateful. That will continue. So that's how I'm measuring success here, is time that I'm earning back to work on my projects. And then next is the financial. And if it breaks even, great. If it is a money generator, great. But I really just want it to be able to help people answer their questions, and I get my time back.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I wanted to close out just by asking, are there any other tips or gotchas that you'd want to share with people who are considering maybe a workbook for their own work?
So one thing with workbooks is to consider what are the different steps somebody needs to walk through and how are you best going to walk them through it? What are the things that really need to stand out? You can leverage a full spectrum of color, or even if it's in grayscale, you can leverage things. I have pages where the entire page is a slightly different color because I really want it to stand out and say, this is important. This is the page you need to fill out before you move to the next section. And really think about what's going to make it easy for people to go through there. I would also consider, are there additional copies that people will need? Say somebody messes up, or they're going to need go through multiple iterations. Can you provide people extra copies already? Or say in the back, there's multiple copies of resources. One thing to do is look at a lot of different workbooks. So say your workbook is about entrepreneurship. You're going to start a business, you're going through it. Look at workbooks for people who are doing diet planning. Look at workbooks for people who are on a yoga retreat. Look at workbooks for all kinds of different topics, because you'll start to see, oh, I like how they did this. Oh, I like how this looks here. And really make sure it's a good experience for the end user. The ultimate thing is that somebody can get through this and they're doing X. By the time somebody finishes my workbooks, they will then do. Being able to fill in that blank is going to be a good guide so that you keep the scope clear, and you can also then easily market it to people and say, this is going to help you do X, Y, Z. I would also say this is a good opportunity to have more people beta read, really emphasize getting out good review copies to people so that way they can give you the feedback and tell others about it. Similar to how you would market a course or something like that. Like, hey, you've got to check this out. You've got to do this. Whereas for our fiction books, we're trying to get to a certain specific readership. The workbook is maybe currently people who are interested in that topic or people who have never heard of this topic before. So be really clear on that.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that would stand in my way in doing a workbook, I don't think that I have a book yet that would lend itself to a workbook treatment. The closest I have is that there's a companion downloadable document along with the Indy Author's Guide to Podcasting for Authors that is the questions at the end of each chapter that people should walk through. I just offer that as, I'm kind of hoping that will be a lead into both the book and my consulting services. But I don't know that I could do a workbook on my own because I'm not a workbook person. Like, I would never fill out a workbook like that myself. And so I would miss all the things that workbook people would want out of it. I think you have to be a user of the product in order to do a good product. So if I ever did think about that, I think that I would have to pair up with someone not only for the formatting as you did for your book, but even for the content, because I wouldn't want someone who really liked the workbook experience to say, oh man, you could say a lot more about this, or, oh, you're going on and on, like you're treating this like a book, you're not treating it like a workbook. So I think assessing to what extent you're a consumer of your own product and then getting the help if you're not really a natural consumer of that product would be important.
Absolutely. And I think there's something to be said too for the companion piece that you have for the Indie Author's Guide to Podcasting for Authors, because those companion sheets and small workbook, like online worksheets, are super valuable. And as an author, if you're thinking, well, I don't think I have enough for a whole workbook, but, there are certain things I talk about in my book where, there's formulas. I would like to just be able to send people to a Google Excel sheet where they can plug and play themselves. Okay, well, how can you make that happen? What links can you use to make the information accessible, but also then, yeah, like you said, they're signing up for the email, you're getting to talk to them, you can follow up, hey, was this helpful for you? And get that feedback. I think that is something any author who's writing nonfiction should be strongly considering, having some kind of worksheet or companion to say, here's what else you might want to do, and thinking about how different people learn. So it doesn't always need to be a workbook, but having that extra is a great way to continue the engagement with the content and ensure that the person who needs that extra bit has that extra bit. Not everybody needs it, but some people do.
Very cool. Well, MK, thank you so much. I was grateful that you provided me with a PDF. I love looking through the workbook, and let people know where they can find it and more about you online.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. This was a really fun conversation. So you can find the Author Your Ambition workbook by MK Williams anywhere that you find great books. As I mentioned, I would suggest getting it either the printed copy sent to you, you can start right away, or you can get the PDF from me directly. If you go to 1mkwilliams.com/workbook, that'll take you to the page. You can see all the purchasing options. The first one is purchase direct from me, which obviously supports me and not billionaires. But then you can print out what you need and go from there.
Cool. Thank you so much.